On my birthday, my family planned a surprise party, but I overheard she doesn't deserve this after what she did. Uncovering a $10,000 theft blamed on me, I confronted them. Their jaws dropped as I revealed evidence of their lies. Birthdays are supposed to be happy. A celebration. A reminder that you're loved. Mine? It started with a whisper. I had just come home from work, exhausted but excited. My 25th birthday. The house was unusually quiet. Suspiciously quiet. Then, from the kitchen, I heard voices. She doesn't deserve this after what she did. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was my Aunt Linda. The one who always hugged me a little too tightly. The one who smiled too widely when she asked how I was doing. I still don't understand why we're even throwing this party. Another voice said, my mother. After what happened, after what she did, I can't even look at her without feeling sick. The air left my lungs. I took a step back, trying to make sense of it. What had I done? What could I have possibly done to deserve this? Then came the words that made my stomach turn. $10,000 doesn't just disappear, Linda. Someone took it, and she was the only one who had access. I gripped the wall to steady myself. My vision blurred. $10,000? What the hell were they talking about? And why were they blaming me? I stepped into the kitchen before I could stop myself. The room fell silent. My mother's face went pale. Linda's eyes darted to the side, guilty. My younger cousin, Mason, sat at the counter, pretending not to hear. What are you talking about? My voice was steady. Too steady. No one answered. No, go on. Tell me. I pressed, stepping forward. What exactly did I do? My mother swallowed hard. We weren't talking about you. I let out a hollow laugh. Really? Because I distinctly heard my name and something about me stealing 10 grand. Linda finally spoke, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Sweetheart, it's complicated. Uncomplicated. A beat of silence. Then my mother sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. There was money missing from the family account. $10,000. And you were the only one who had the login. I blinked. Are you joking? No answer. You actually think I stole from you? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Do you hear yourselves? Mom, I would never. We checked everything. Linda interrupted, her voice sharper now. And all the transfers were made from your account. I shook my head. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. So instead of asking me, instead of even considering the possibility that someone else did it, you just decided I was guilty? My mother shifted uncomfortably. We didn't want to believe it, she said, as if that made it better. But the evidence. I laughed bitterly. You think I'd be dumb enough to steal and leave a trail? Linda's lips pursed. Maybe you got cocky. Maybe you thought we wouldn't check. I stared at them, disgusted. My own family. The people who were supposed to have my back. I turned to Mason. He had his head down, fiddling with his phone. Mason, I asked, do you believe this? He didn't look up. The silence was my answer. I clenched my fists. My skin burned with humiliation, anger, and disbelief. They had already decided. The trial was over before I even knew I was on trial. And the worst part? They were throwing me a birthday party. As if to say, happy birthday, thief. I turned and walked out. I needed air. Space. I needed to think. But as I stormed outside, something clicked in my brain. I never used that account. I never even had the password. Which meant someone had set me up. And if they thought I was just going to take the fall for it, they didn't know me at all. I walked. Fast. My pulse pounded in my ears. My breath ragged as the night air wrapped around me. They thought I stole 10 grand. My own family. I pulled my phone out, my fingers shaking. If someone transferred money from that account, there had to be a record. A login history. Something. I opened my banking app, denied. Wrong password. Of course. I never set up access to that account, which meant someone did it for me. I clenched my jaw. If they thought I was going to let them pin this on me, they were in for a surprise. I spent the night at a cheap motel across town, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction over the past few months. Had there been signs? Clues? Who would have done this? Linda. She had always been weirdly involved in family finances. Mason? No. Too careless. Too lazy. Mom? My stomach twisted. No. She wouldn't, would she? Sleep never came. Just a growing fire in my gut. By morning, I had a plan. I showed up at my mother's house like nothing happened. Same clothes from the night before. Same storm is brewing inside me. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. Oh, you're back. Like she hadn't expected me to return. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. It's my birthday, isn't it? She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the house was decorated with gold balloons and a half-hearted happy birthday banner. The living room smelled of coffee and regret. Linda sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She barely glanced at me. Mason was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to care. I took a deep breath. Showtime. I dropped my bag onto the floor and stretched. So about this whole I stole 10 grand thing. Mom flinched. Linda sighed dramatically, setting her mug down. Honey, let's not ruin today. Oh, I'm not. I cut in. In fact, I'm here to clear everything up. She frowned. I checked. I continued, leaning against the counter. I never even set up online access to that account. So explain to me how I logged in and transferred 10 grand. Silence. Mason looked up. Just for a second. Linda cleared her throat. Maybe you forgot. I laughed. Right. I forgot that I secretly accessed an account I never had access to. Sounds totally reasonable. Mom crossed her arms. Then how do you explain the transfers? I don't have to, I said coolly. But someone does. Linda's face darkened. I'll let that sink in. Let them squirm. Then I turned to Mason. You've been quiet. His grip on his phone tightened. Anything to add? His leg bounced. Linda shot him a warning glance. And that was when I knew. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a fact. Mason knew something. And Linda? She was making sure he kept his mouth shut. I stepped closer. Mason. He finally looked up. His lips parted like he was about to speak. That's enough, Linda snapped. We both turned to her. We are not discussing this further, she said, standing. You want to prove your innocence? Fine. Get a lawyer. But don't come in here throwing accusations around. I tilted my head. Accusation? I haven't accused anyone. Yet. She glared at me. Mom sighed, rubbing her temples. Please, let's just get through today without drama. Drama, right? Because I was the problem. I smiled. Sure, Mom. No drama. For now. The party was surreal. Relatives showed up, hugging me, acting like everything was fine. I played along, accepting gifts from people who secretly thought I was a thief. But I wasn't really listening. I was watching. Watching Linda chat with my uncle, her laughter a little too forced. Watching Mason hover near the dessert table, avoiding my gaze. Watching my mother smile, but never look at me. Something was off. And then, right in the middle of the party, I saw it. Mason's phone. Unlocked. Left on the kitchen counter. I glanced around. No one was watching. My fingers moved fast. Opened his banking app. Checked his recent transactions. And there it was. A deposit. Exactly $10,000. From an unnamed source. Cold fury wrapped around my spine. I took a screenshot. Sent it to myself. Then placed his phone back exactly where I found it. I turned around, heart pounding. And that's when I caught Linda watching me. Her face went slack. Just for a second. Then she smiled. Slow. Calculated. Like she knew exactly what I just found. Like she wasn't worried. Because she had something worse waiting for me. Linda knew. I could see it in the way her eyes locked onto mine, her lips curling at the corners, amusement flickering behind that polished exterior. She didn't panic. Wasn't scrambling for an excuse. She was ready. And that meant one thing. She had planned for this. I forced my expression to stay neutral. My hands relaxed at my sides, even though every nerve in my body screamed to act. To expose her. To wipe that smug grin off her face in front of everyone. But not yet. Not until I knew everything. The party dragged on, tension sitting between us like a loaded gun. Relatives laughed, toasted, and passed around cake. Meanwhile, I was drowning in my own thoughts. Mason was involved. That much was clear. But was he the mastermind or just a pawn? And my mother? How much did she actually know? I needed answers. So I waited. By the time the guests left, I had already planned my next move. Mom was in the kitchen, rinsing plates. Mason had disappeared upstairs. And Linda? She was still here, lingering, like she was waiting for something. I followed her onto the back porch, where the night was thick and silent. So, I said casually, leaning against the railing, are you going to confess? Or should I do the honors? Linda chuckled. Actually, I chuckled. Confess to what? Sweetheart? She said, pulling a cigarette from her purse. Being the only person in this family with a functioning brain? I crossed my arms. 10 grand, Linda. Straight into Mason's account. And I have the proof. She didn't flinch. Just lit her cigarette, taking a slow drag. And the audacity. I stepped closer. And that means you and Mason set me up. Her lips twitched like she was holding back laughter. Oh, honey, she sighed, flicking ash to the ground. You really think it's that simple? A cold sensation crawled up my spine. I have screenshots, I pressed. Bank transactions. A clear trail leading right to Mason. She exhaled smoke, shaking her head. And yet, somehow, you're still the one everyone believes is guilty. I opened my mouth, then stopped. Because she was right. Even with the evidence, my family had already decided. If I went to them now, waving my phone around, what would happen? Mom would say I was grasping at straws. That I was desperate. Mason would play dumb. Shrug. Say he didn't know where the money came from. And Linda? Linda would sit back and watch me burn. I gritted my teeth. Why? Her smile widened. Why what? Why go through all this? My voice was low, sharp. Why pin this on me? Linda sighed dramatically, like she was tired of pretending. You were in the way. My stomach dropped. In the way of what? She leaned in. And for the first time, I saw it, pure, unfiltered malice. This family's money. It's real money. I frowned. What the hell are you talking about? She exhaled another slow drag of smoke. Oh, sweetheart. You think that missing 10 grand is the real theft? My heart pounded. That was just a distraction, she murmured. The real money? Let's just say your dear mother isn't as smart as she thinks she is when it comes to handling finances. I felt the blood drain from my face. Linda saw it, and she relished it. You were supposed to be the perfect scapegoat, she continued. A little scandal, a little stolen money. The family gets mad at you, cuts you off. Meanwhile, I handle the actual funds without anyone paying attention. I gripped the railing, nausea curling in my gut. You're lying, I whispered. She smiled. Am I? The worst part? I believed her. Inside, I could hear Mom's voice, muffled, tired. Probably on the phone with another relative, talking about how disappointed she was in me. Linda flicked her cigarette into the grass and straightened her coat. You can run to them if you want, she said. Tell them what you found. But they won't listen. Not to you. I clenched my fists. Face it, sweetheart, she said, patting my cheek. You already lost. She turned and walked inside, leaving me standing there in the cold, watching her slip back into my family's trust like a shadow. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore. It was about beating her at her own game. Linda thought she won. She thought I would just accept it, let her pin this theft on me, let her walk away with whatever money she was quietly siphoning while everyone was too distracted blaming me. She thought wrong, because if she wanted a game, I was about to show her I knew how to play. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I did what I should have done from the beginning. I dug. I searched through every financial record I could find. Old emails, forgotten paperwork stuffed into drawers. I even hacked into my mother's laptop, something I would have never dared to do before. But desperate times, right? And that's when I found it. The real crime. Bank transfers. Dozens of them. Small enough to avoid suspicion, but adding up to something much bigger. Money siphoned out of the family's investments, rerouted through accounts I didn't recognize. And the name attached to most of them? Linda. My stomach twisted. The 10 grand wasn't even the real play. It was a distraction, a cover for the real theft happening right under my mother's nose. And Mason? His account was just one of many. By morning, I had a plan. Linda had played dirty. So now, I was going to bury her. I showed up at the house again, calm, composed, every bit the guilty daughter my family thought I was. Mom was in the kitchen, avoiding my eyes. Mason barely looked up from his phone. And Linda? She was sitting at the table, sipping her tea, waiting for me to break. Too bad for her, I wasn't here to break. I sat down across from her, sliding my phone onto the table. I need to show you something, I said. Linda raised a brow. More evidence, sweetheart, she said, mockingly. Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough? I smiled and pressed play. The recording played loud and clear. Her voice, her exact words from last night. That missing 10 grand? That was just a distraction. The real money? Your mother isn't as smart as she thinks she is when it comes to handling finances. The room went still. Linda's expression didn't change, but her grip on her teacup tightened. Mom turned, eyes wide. What is that? I leaned forward. Proof. I'll let the next part play. You were supposed to be the perfect scapegoat. A little scandal. A little stolen money. The family gets mad at you, cuts you off. Meanwhile, I handle the actual funds without anyone paying attention. Silence. Then, you recorded me? Linda hissed, her mask finally slipping. I tilted my head. You thought I was just going to let you ruin me? Mom's face was drained of color. She looked between us, confused, like she was seeing something for the first time. Linda, what is she talking about? Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew. There was no talking her way out of this. Not when I had her own words exposing everything. Mason stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. I didn't know, he stammered. She told me it was some inheritance thing. I didn't know it was stolen. Linda snapped her head toward him. Mason, shut up. You used me. Mason shouted, his face red. You said it was a gift. Sit down. Linda's voice was sharp, dangerous. But Mason wasn't listening anymore. Neither was Mom. She grabbed the phone from my hands, replaying the recording, her expression shifting from shock to realization to something I had never seen before, rage. Linda stood, smoothing her dress. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice calm again, her mask sliding back into place. You can't prove a thing. I smiled. Oh, but I can't, I said, tapping my phone. Because I didn't just record you. I found the bank records. The transfers. All those little payments you try to hide. I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper. You weren't as careful as you thought. For the first time, Linda actually looked nervous. The next few minutes were chaotic. Mom snatched her laptop, pulling up the accounts herself, seeing the stolen money, the fake transactions. Mason was pacing, panicking, demanding to know if he was going to get arrested. Linda? She was quiet, not defeated, not yet. She was thinking, calculating. And then, just as I expected, she went for her final play. You can't turn me in. Mom's head snapped up. What? Linda's lips curled. You won't turn me in? I folded my arms. And why is that? Her eyes gleamed. Because if I go down, I take her with me. She nodded toward Mom. You think I handled all this alone? You think your precious mother didn't sign off on anything? Mom's face twisted in horror. That's not true. Linda shrugged. Maybe not knowingly, but legally? If I go to jail, guess whose name is on some of those accidental transactions? The room went cold. My mother looked at me, stricken. Linda was grinning now. So, sweetheart, she purred, picking up her purse. Do you really want to go to war with me? I'd expected this. I knew she'd try to drag my mother down with her. That's why I had already planned my next move. I sighed, stood, stretched. You're right, I said. Linda's grin widened. I don't want to go to war with you. I picked up my phone and made a call. But the police do. Her face dropped. She lunged forward, but it was too late. The line was already ringing, and I made sure she heard every single word. Yes, I'd like to report financial fraud. I have evidence, including recorded confessions and bank transactions. Linda's hands clenched into fists. Mason's face went pale. Mom just stood there, silent, watching as the walls came crashing down. I walked to the front door, pulling it open just as the distant sound of sirens echoed in the night. Linda turned to me, her face twisted in fury. You think this is over? She seethed. I smiled. Oh, Linda, I said, stepping aside as flashing lights flooded the driveway. It's just beginning. The sirens screamed closer, red and blue lights slicing through the night. Linda stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. Mason had backed himself against the wall, shaking his head in disbelief. Oh my God, he whispered. This is really happening. Mom was gripping the counter, her face pale, her breathing uneven. And me? I stepped forward, watching Linda carefully. She was still calculating, still trying to find an escape route. But there wasn't one. Not this time. The knock on the door was sharp. Linda inhaled, straightened her coat, turned to me with a sickly sweet smile. I hope you know what you're doing, sweetheart. I smiled back. I do. I opened the door. Two officers stood there, serious and unreadable. We receive a report of financial fraud, one of them said. Who made the call? I lifted my hand. That would be me. Linda let out a breathy laugh. This is a misunderstanding, officers. The second cop glanced at her. Your name? Linda Parker, she answered smoothly. And I assure you, this is a family matter. Nothing criminal. I handed them my phone. I have a recorded confession. Bank transactions. Emails. Enough to prove she's been stealing for months. The first officer took the phone, pressed play. Linda's voice filled the room. That missing 10 grand? That was just a distraction. The real money? Your mother isn't as smart as she thinks she is when it comes to handling finances. The officers exchanged looks. Linda went rigid. Mason ran a shaky hand through his hair. Wait, so what happens now? The second officer sighed. If the evidence holds up, we'll be making an arrest. Linda turned to me, slow and deliberate. For a split second, I thought she might lunge at me. But then she laughed, low and bitter. Congratulations, sweetheart, she murmured. You won. I tilted my head. No, Linda. I watched as the officer pulled out the handcuffs. You lost. They took her outside, reading her rights as she stepped into the flashing lights. Mom watched silent. She hadn't said a word in minutes, just staring at the woman she once trusted. Mason looked like he might be sick. When the door finally closed behind them, the house felt empty, like something rotten had finally been removed. For a while, no one spoke. Then softly Mom whispered, I let her do this. I turned. She was staring at the floor, her expression unreadable. I trusted her. I defended her. And all along, her voice broke. I should have been angry. Maybe I was. But right now, I just felt tired. She fooled everyone, Mom, I said. Not just you. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. But I didn't believe you. Silence. Mason sat down heavily. I didn't either. I swallowed. The bitterness sat on my tongue. I know. Mom wiped her face. I'm so sorry. I believed her. I did. But some things? They don't heal overnight. The next few days were a blur of statements, paperwork, and endless calls from extended family. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had something to say. But the truth was out. And Linda? She was facing charges. Mason cut a deal, cooperated with investigators in exchange for staying out of jail. Mom? She spent weeks unraveling the damage Linda had done to our finances, to our family. And me? I was just trying to figure out where I stood after everything. One evening, I found Mom sitting outside, watching the sunset. I hesitated before stepping onto the porch. She glanced at me, then patted the seat beside her. You okay? She asked. I sat down, took a deep breath. I don't know. She nodded. Me neither. For a while, we just sat there, listening to the crickets, watching the sky shift into soft golds and deep purples. Then Mom cleared her throat. I know I can't take back what I did. I stare at my hands. I should have believed you, she continued. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want to fix this. If you'll let me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to say I forgive you. I wanted to say it's okay. But it wasn't. Not yet. Instead, I just nodded. We'll figure out. She gave a small, hopeful smile. Yes, she said. We will. Months passed. The trial came and went. Linda tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was airtight. She took a plea deal. 5 years. Maybe less with good behavior. Mason went back to school, trying to rebuild whatever was left of his reputation. Mom and I, we worked on ourselves. Some days were good. Some days weren't. But at least we were trying. And me? I wasn't the same person I was before this mess. I am smarter now. Sharper. And if there was one thing I had learned, it was that trust wasn't about words. It was about who was still standing when everything fell apart.